Alrighty, welcome in everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, November 20th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about those CFP rankings that came out yesterday. I have some problems, as well as does just about everyone else on the internet, it seems. So we'll break that down, as well as all the other matchups for the upcoming CFP, at least in this certain ranking. Then we'll get to Notre Dame Army. We'll break down that big-time game. We'll get to Ohio State, Indiana tomorrow, but definitely want to get into this one today. A huge game that maybe Army can shock the world, knock Notre Dame out of the playoff, and put themselves right in there. Then we'll get into the Big 12 showdowns, Colorado, Kansas, as well as BYU, Arizona State. Two huge games that will probably decide who ends up going to Arlington at the end of the year. Then we'll get to the Week 13 upsets as I see them. A lot of SEC teams that have to be very nervous. I have 4 on this list of 6. Got to be very careful as they get into this week. A couple going on the road for really tough games before a big-time rivalry. Then we'll get into Week 13 questions. We'll get into all my big-time who needs to make a statement, the under-radar game, all of those type of things, and really a lot of really good under-the-radar games this upcoming weekend. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat, Use a super chat at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Add a question, comment, whatever you'd like, and it'll pop up on the screen with your name. We can have fun back and forth here. Sometimes that chat goes just a little fast, so definitely a little bit easier if it gets on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Also, GSMCpodcast.net is up and working, does the exact same thing, so either one of those you'd like to use, please do, and we can make this a little bit more interactive. But let's get into this, because the CFP rankings did come out yesterday, and they're a little bit weird in a number of different places. Now, I think some of the stuff is people getting a little bit mad just to get mad, to be totally honest with you, but there are definitely some things here that I do not necessarily love, and we'll start with just the rankings, and then we'll get into the playoff picture as it is right now. But starting right off the bat, what is Missouri doing still in the top 25? I have no earthly idea why they would ever be in this grouping. Obviously, I understand they played a good game this past weekend. Brady Cook coming back was a huge part of that. Let's be honest, that's not a top 25 team in the country, probably a top 35, 40 team in the country, not a top 25 team in the country. I don't know why they didn't drop out after the loss this weekend. But whatever. Then you have UNLV at 24. You have Illinois at 25. Those are two big-time ones because UNLV does give Boise State a ranked win. Illinois does give Penn State a ranked win. So two huge things there that kind of just help out the resume of a couple of teams that are towards the top of this list, a couple of teams that are really vying for some big-time position in this playoff. So I do think that is kind of a big part of this, although I don't necessarily love that it's using ranked wins as the moniker. That is something that they use, and definitely a huge feather in the cap for Penn State as well as for Boise State, getting UNLV in there. But then you have the first big-time question, which is Iowa State and Arizona State are at 22 and 21. Then you have Tulane and Army at 20 and 19. What happens if Tulane wins out the rest of the way and Arizona State wins out the rest of the way? Or let's just say Iowa State gets to the Big 12 championship and they win it. Could the Big 12 be left out? I'd be surprised if that were to happen, let's be totally honest. But at the end of the day, it's really interesting to watch this unfold, because if Iowa State were to get in at 10-2 and then win that game at 11-2, they'd be right up against a 11-2 Tulane, or maybe even a 13-0 Army, and then you have to battle with them and a 12-1 Boise State. Maybe the Big 12 isn't quite as safe as I thought. I still think they will get in. I still tend to believe that they will get one of those byes. But it is definitely becoming more and more a question as we get closer and closer. If chaos happens, could the Big 12 be left out? I think they're giving them the option of if a Baylor or a Kansas State wins it, they probably will be left out, if I'm being totally honest. But outside of that, I would bet anyone that's ranked on here from the Big 12, if they were to win it, they would be above these teams. It's just interesting to watch, because those Arizona, Iowa State, Tulane, Army gives you an idea that maybe that Army team could just stay above a lot of these Big 12 teams and end up getting one of those bids instead of the Big 12. But moving forward, South Carolina hanging in there. Obviously, I've said before, I don't think they're going to get in. I think it's going to be really tough for them to get in, but do very much love that they're getting a little bit of love here. They absolutely are a team that deserves to be recognized in this back half of the season, and they're getting that. I don't think they're going to get much more than that, if I'm being totally honest, but at the end of the day, very cool moment for them. Then you have Clemson, Colorado, Texas A&M. that's pretty much the got to win your conference group. I think the one exception could be Texas A&M if they got to the SEC championship and then lost, because I just don't think they can punish that person. Now, we will talk about that here in a second, because Ward Manuel said something that is worrisome at the very least around that. And then I have a big issue here. BYU, they were up at 6 last week. They're down at 14 this week. They are behind an SMU team that they beat. They're behind a Boise State team that they're just outright better than, and pretty much every metric tells you that. And I'm one to talk, obviously. I had them drop out of my top 15, but I had them at 10 before. I did not think all that highly of BYU before. The committee obviously did, or they didn't, and they were just keeping them as a placeholder because they were undefeated, which is the wrong way to go about this business. So either one of two things happened. They either had BYU more highly ranked than they actually thought they should be, because they were undefeated, and that's not the right way they should go about it, or they dropped them way too far without really thinking about it, and that's not the way they should go about it. But at the end of the day, I do think they'll still probably get above Boise State, probably get above SMU if they were to win out the rest of the way. I just don't love that, and I think it shows that something in that room is not quite the way that it should be. But moving forward to the top 12 teams, Boise State makes their addition into the top 12, and I don't love it, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think they're a top 12 team in the country. I think they're putting them there to avoid all the disaster of, oh, well, this team's at number 12 and they're not in the field, or in things like that. I mean, Tennessee's at number 11 and they're not in the field. But at the end of the day, I think they're trying to avoid that as much as possible. So I think they're artificially inflating Boise State just a little bit. But at the end of the day, they are at number 12. And then you do have Tennessee, first team out. They are not going to be in the field as of right now. They have Ole Miss, Georgia, Bama, all above them. Going to be really tough to find your way above that if everything holds the way that we expect it to. Miami's ranked too high, just plain and simple. There's no reason for them to be number 8, especially when you have a BYU team all the way down there at number 14 that has been roughly better than them, probably has a better resume than they do. But at the end of the day, I understand what they're coming from here. I think it's one of those teams that obviously does have that high-end talent, but I just don't get it. I really don't. I don't think they deserve to be above SMU. I don't really think they deserve to be above BYU, if I'm being totally honest. But Miami's at number 8. They stay the course as the top ACC team. Obviously, a couple of big games coming up, but it's pretty much been sent that if Miami were to win out the rest of the way, they would go into that ACC championship as the higher-ranked team, and then you just got to win that game. Notre Dame is sitting pretty as of right now at the number 6 position. I don't think they should be there, but I guess we've given up on trying to tear down Notre Dame in any way. But they lost to NIU, who's not good in the MAC, but that's beside the point, I guess. I guess that's not important in this. But they are one of the teams that we probably should be mad at, if I'm being totally honest. But yeah, let's yell at Indiana all day long. But the top 5 is unchanged. I didn't expect it to change. A lot of people did not love that it didn't change. Here's the thing. If they were going to change it, if that was going to be a different pattern, if it was going to be, a couple of these 2-loss SEC teams on top of these teams, they would have done it immediately. They would have dropped Penn State. They would have dropped Indiana. They probably would have dropped Texas a little bit lower in this list, and they would have propped up all those other teams. Didn't happen in the first rankings, and it's probably not going to happen throughout these rankings. So if Penn State wins this weekend over Minnesota, they're going to bump up one spot if Indiana loses, or even if Ohio State loses. That's just probably the way that's going to go. I don't necessarily fully agree with that, but I understand where they're coming from, at least a little bit. But let's get to the bracket here, because a lot of very interesting things. First thing, Boise State does get a bye in this scenario. I hate that, and I will break it down a little bit more in tomorrow's show, but I do not think they deserve a bye. I tend to believe they probably won't get it at the end of the day, if I'm being totally honest, but one of those things that I just do not like by any means, and the reason I don't like it so much is Ohio State's basically in the semifinals. Ohio State, I was watching the Josh Pate show yesterday, I believe, and he broke down these games. Ohio State would be a 21-point favorite against BYU if they were to play. Then they would play Boise State. Guess what? They would be more than a 21-point favorite against Boise State. They would essentially be in the semifinals before the playoff even started. That should never be the way this goes. No team should be wanting to lose their conference championship so they can get into that 5 seed, so they can dominate some lesser competition and be healthy by the time they get to the semifinals. That is a very dangerous way to go about this, and another problem with this format. But here we are, Ohio State. If this were to happen, I'm telling you, they would roll to the semifinals of the playoff. And then you do have Penn State, Georgia. You do have Indiana, Ole Miss. You do have Notre Dame, Alabama. 3 really, really fun games. And on the Pate show, they were talking about what FanDuel would have in those games. Every SEC team would be favored by 1.5 points. They would all be favored on a away from home on a northern field. So gives you an idea of what we're saying here. But at the end of the day, it would be very, very fun games. I think Georgia Penn State would be a very awesome game. Obviously, Notre Dame Bama would be an absolute classic to watch. And then Indiana Ole Miss. That would be up and down the field, be really, really fun to watch. Would go back and forth, and we would get plenty of great second round games as well. Whether it was Ole Miss or Indiana against Texas, that would be incredible. Whether it was Penn State or UGA against Miami, I think it would both be really, really fun. I tend to believe both of those teams would beat them, but still would be a very, very fun game. Ohio State, Boise State, boy, I don't care about that one. They would win and they would roll. Ohio State would. And then Alabama or Notre Dame, Oregon would be incredible. It would be absolutely incredible to watch, and one of those games that could just decide, that SEC Big Ten battle that people have been having. But it'd be a fun group, no doubt about that. I don't love that Boise State gets the bye here. I tend to believe that will not happen when they finally do this thing, but definitely a little bit worrisome. I don't love it, and I definitely don't think it's very valid, if I'm being totally honest with you. But big-time takeaways. This committee sent the message very, very loud and clear as far as I'm concerned. Win your games. Don't care who you play. Win your games. So schedule tomato can 1, 2, 3, and 4 if you're an SEC team. Schedule 3 of them if you're a Big 12 team, if you're a Big 10 team, if you're an ACC team. Avoid this at all costs. There's no point in Texas scheduling Michigan. Texas just scheduled at home and home with Notre Dame. Go ahead and cancel it. They're playing Ohio State next year. Go ahead and cancel it. There's no point in playing it, obviously, if they're not going to rank these teams according to any type of strength of schedule. They're just going to rank them, 12 wins, you're up here. 11 wins, you're right here. 10 wins, you're right here. 9 wins, you're right here. That's the way that it's breaking down right now, and it's not the way that it should break down. Strength of schedule is not being factored in nearly as much as they are telling you that it is. But the other part of this, according to the ESPN predictor, Indiana would have a 95% chance to get in with a loss to Ohio State. That should not be the case. I'm not saying they should totally be out if they lose to Ohio State, but we have to be able to judge them by what happens on the field. If that's actually correct and Indiana would get in regardless of the result to Ohio State, we're doing something wrong, just plain and simple. I don't understand why that would be the case. I don't understand how that would even be a conversation. The other part of it is apparently a 10-2 Texas would likely be in the field, according to that predictor. That's insane. They haven't had a big win either. They haven't had one of those marquee wins that you should have to have if you want to get into the playoff. Period. End of story. If you have not won a big game, if you have not shown that you can go toe-to-toe or beat one of the big-time teams in this country, you don't deserve to play with the big-time teams in the country for the biggest award in the country. Period. End of story. I don't know why that's a hard thing for people to understand, but apparently it is. But I think there's one of the things that kind of makes me lean a little bit towards maybe Indiana could drop out is what they did to BYU. I do think that could happen to Indiana in some respects. They could possibly drop out if they were to get blown out this weekend. But honestly, it feels more and more like Indiana might just be safe, regardless of what happens, regardless of the score, regardless of if they get blown out by 50. It feels like they might just be safe regardless, which is absolutely ridiculous. The same way that if Texas were to lose to A&M and still be safe, it would be absolutely ridiculous. So I don't like this committee. I'll be totally honest. I think they're doing the best that they can. I'm not arguing that, but when they said that they watch the games and they watch film and they break it all down, either they were lying or they are missing what I'm seeing, if I'm being totally honest. So no disrespect. I obviously, respect to them for doing this. They're doing it poorly. I'll just be totally honest. It's not nearly the way that it should be, and I have a feeling that they're going to have Greg Sankey busting down their doors after Selection Sunday because I think they're going to make the wrong decision somewhere. I can't promise that, but I have a feeling that they're going to do something that they probably shouldn't do just because a team won some games that they should win. But that's beside the point. We will get into that throughout the week and throughout the next couple of weeks. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, we'll get into Notre Dame Army, a huge game going on in Yankee Stadium this upcoming weekend, and we got to break it down, got to give it some love right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about those CFP rankings that came out yesterday. I have some issues, no doubt about that. I don't love that Boise State would get a bye in that scenario. I don't love the way that they're breaking down all of the different 2-loss and 1-loss teams. Feels like they're just looking at the record, ordering those teams, and then deciding who they think is the better team between that group. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, this weekend will be huge, and those next rankings will really give us an idea of where their minds are at going forward. But let's get into this big-time game. I cannot wait for this one because it's not one that we expected by any means. It's not one that everyone circled on their calendar and said that one's going to be for a spot in the playoff, but it might just be for a spot in the playoff. Obviously, both these teams would have jobs to do after this game. You know, Notre Dame would have to go beat USC. Army would have to go on and win the American, obviously. But it obviously would put them in a great spot. There's no two ways about that. Notre Dame, to me, is probably still working off the stink of that NIU game. Seems like they're not for the CFP committee by any means, but they are to me, no doubt about that. And it'll be interesting to watch what they can do in this game. They've done a really great job, no doubt about that. They've handled business. They've done their what they've needed to do. A little bit of a tough spot against Louisville, so something to watch there. Maybe Army can... They probably can't be as explosive as Louisville is, but they absolutely can do some of the things defensively that Louisville can do. But a huge reason for why Notre Dame is kind of finding this groove, why they're kind of going off to the area that they probably need to be to compete in the playoff is Riley Leonard and Mike Denbrock. That was a marriage that early on looked a little bit shaky. It didn't necessarily look the way that Notre Dame fans wanted it to look, the way that a lot of them expected it to look. They have kind of made that work. It's kind of found the mold that a lot of things... You know what it kind of reminds me of is Tommy Rees and Jalen Milroe last year. It was a little bit ugly to start. They were trying to figure out what he does best, where he fits into the offense, how do they want to expose this, or how do they want to make this offense explosive. And it feels like they found it over the last 4 or 5 weeks. It feels like they found what Riley Leonard does well. It feels like they found what these wide receivers do well, and they're attacking that over and over and over again. Now, I still have my worries about them against an elite defense like a Georgia or an Alabama or someone like that. But I still do think they found a little bit of rhythm on offense that they just didn't have early on, and it gives them a huge leg up in a number of different games, including this one. But over on the Army side, I think you have a ton on this plate, and I think when you look at this Army team, you have a moment here to totally change what your football program is about. You have a chance to beat Notre Dame. You have a chance to get a huge win, and you get to do it, obviously not at home, obviously, but you get a home game, quote-unquote, to do it. It is going to be incredible to watch this unfold, and if they were to get this win, the entire narrative around what Army football is and what it can be would change overnight. I'm just being totally honest. It would be one of those moments that they could point back to in 25 years and say that is the moment that Army football changed. Now, obviously, they wouldn't quite get to the CFP. They would have a very clear path where they would just have to beat Tulane in the AAC championship. They're already in it, so they wouldn't necessarily have to win the UTSA game. They would have to win that Tulane game. But regardless, it would put them in a position where everyone's looking at them in the group of 5. Everyone's saying that is the team that everyone should be watching. That is a team that can compete with some of the elite teams in the country. That is the team that really can push a lot of these elite teams. So it's going to be awesome to watch. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, this Army program has been in the dark for a very, very long time. I can't remember a time where Army football was a big factor in college football. They are going to be Saturday, and that's a special thing. Cannot wait to see that unfold. And as you can imagine, this one's going to be decided on the ground. Both these teams are top 11 in the country when it comes to rush yards per game. Jeremiah Love and all of the running backs that they have for Notre Dame, along with Riley Leonard, is an elite group, no doubt about that. And then for Army, Bryson Daly and Kanye Udo, one of the best duos in the country. A really, really elite group. And Bryson Daly, frankly, should get a little bit more love for the Heisman, but getting injured a little bit hurt that. But incredible, incredible player, and definitely a guy that, if you're going to win one of these games, it usually takes a Herculean performance. He has that in him. There's no doubt about that. He has a lot of juice in him, and I think Army is in one of those spots where they've been dominating pretty much all year. They've been rolling through teams. They've looked incredible. Obviously, that North Texas game was a little bit scary at moments, but they handled business there, got on with their day. They're coming off a bye. This is a totally different world. This is an entirely different human that's on the other side of the field. This is a 300-pound Riley Mills, a 300-pound Howard Cross. This is not a normal team by any means. So it's going to take some gimmicks. There's no doubt about that. It's going to take that triple option offense, putting them off kilter and putting them in confusing positions and maybe hitting a couple of big plays, which we'll get into here in a second. Also, they're going to need turnovers. There's no doubt about that. Army, as well as Notre Dame, have actually been really good around turnover margin per game, both over 1 per game. So really winning the turnover battle. Who can keep that going? Who is going to go on the other side of that? And probably will decide it one way or the other. Obviously, Notre Dame has a little bit more wiggle room in that respect, but one of those things that Army's probably really got to win that turnover battle if they want to get that win. But when you look at this game, I think a lot of people will say, well, Notre Dame rolled over Navy. So obviously, they're going to be able to handle the Army attack. They're going to be able to handle what Army has to throw at them. I wouldn't make that one-to-one comparison, if I'm being totally honest. First, Navy just gave the ball away a lot. They made a lot of just unforced errors because, frankly, it looked like they were scared of the guys that were on the other side, which can't necessarily blame them too much. But at the end of the day, Army is much less likely to make those mistakes. They're much better about holding onto the ball than Navy is. Also, they have a more dynamic pass game, so they attack you just a little bit differently as well. I'm not saying that Notre Dame being able to dominate Navy isn't a good indicator of this game, but I wouldn't necessarily say they dominated Navy, so they're going to dominate Army. But the Notre Dame defense, in a lot of ways, is one of the best run defenses in the country, giving up about 126 per game. It probably will get over that. Let's be totally honest. Against Army, it usually does get over that. Can Army get to 200 is really the question that I have. Can they get to 200 yards rushing? Can they really get this thing rolling downhill? And then on the other side, they're the number one rush offense in the country. They're also the number one rush defense in the country. They allow 71 yards per game. Obviously, not the elite talent necessarily that they're playing on the other side, but definitely a good moniker for how good this team is and what they can do. So this one's going to be special. There's no doubt about that. You got two historic programs, Army looking to make history, Notre Dame looking to get back where they feel like they belong. It's just something that the 12-team playoff gives us that the 4-team just didn't quite give us. I still think this would be a relatively big game in the 4-team, not quite as big as it is in the 12-team. But players to watch. Bo Collins is a huge player in this game, and I think he's a huge reason why this offense has really taken off. They did a great job early on in the season kind of getting him going, but over the last couple of weeks, he's really been the guy. He's been absolutely huge, and I think he's one of those guys that when you talk about physicality and the advantage that Notre Dame's going to have, it always starts in the trenches, but it's going to extend to the outsides, and that's going to be one of the big-time examples of that. And then Riley Mills on the interior. That guy next to him, actually, Howard Cross, might be out for this game. He's still very much up in the air. He was out for that Virginia game. We'll see what happens with that. But Riley Mills, regardless, is going to have to step up big and really dominate the interior. They slow down that dive from Kanye Udo. It's going to be a really long day for this Army team. Then you got Noah Short on the other side. This is a very, very important player for Army. He is kind of one of those wing backs, one of those kind of dynamic players. He is a big-time receiver for them as well, and they got to hit some big plays. He's going to be huge coming off the edge and really getting this Notre Dame defense spread out, but also hitting that one or two big plays down the field in the pass game. And then you got Brett Gurina, a very, very talented linebacker for Army. They got to fly around. Pretty much all of these linebackers. They're going to be rotated in a lot. They're going to play around with a lot of things, but they got to fly around. They got to make every type of play. They cannot miss tackles because if they do, this one's going to get ugly in a hurry. I'll just be totally honest. So he's going to be hugely important along with all the other linebackers on Army's roster. Keys to the game for Notre Dame. Trust your run game. I see no reason to believe why your O-line should not own this day. Now, obviously, Army's going to give you a little bit tougher of a challenge than a Navy did, but at the end of the day, you're the 11th best rush offense in the country, 216 yards per game. Lean on your group. Lean on that running back in Jeremiah Smith and Jadarian Price, and just trust that group. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't, and if they do start to force the ball downfield, then some issues could arise for this offense where they get a little bit stagnant. Also, just don't beat yourself. Army's going to need turnovers. They're going to need penalties for them to win this game. Now, they are relatively good at limiting turnovers. They did have 2 last week, although very weird game last week, so I think one of those not quite as big of a deal as it seems. And then on the other side of that, they're not great at limiting penalties. 6.2 per game in the penalty category. Got to make sure that that does not happen on Saturday, because that's really the only way Army's going to have a shot, is if you give them shots to win this game. And then eliminate big plays. Notre Dame is really good on the back end, no doubt about that. But if they don't allow a big pass play in this game, they will win. They cannot allow that big-time play that gets Army really moving, that gets this Army offense into it and adds a little bit of doubt for Notre Dame. So eliminating that big-time play that gets Army really back into this and really ignites them is the big-time goal here. And if they can do that, then I don't see a world where Army's able to win this game. For Army, run the clock. Really run the clock. Do it every single time you have the ball. And honestly, that's kind of just the way an Army game goes, to be more than honest. But limiting possessions, running the ball, chewing clock, all the most important things for Army if they're going to be able to get this one. And just winning the time of possession might not be enough. They might need to win it by 15 minutes, by 12 minutes, and really dominate that clock, because the reality is you have certain players on the other side that your defense just is not going to be able to tackle for 4 quarters. You have to give them time off. You have to give them time to reset, or Notre Dame's going to score 50 points in a hurry. And then you do got to get a big play early. We talked about Notre Dame having to limit that. If Army can get that early in the game, let's say they go up on a big play on the first drive by 7 points, and it's 7-0, and Notre Dame looks up and maybe they start to panic a little bit. I think they have all the confidence in the world going into this game, but it can creep in very, very quickly, especially with a team like Army that you know is going to be tough to defend. If they hit that one big play, if they get one big play down the field and it's 7-0 before Notre Dame knows what hits them, I think this thing could get interesting in a hurry, and this Notre Dame team could get a little bit clammed up in a hurry. And then keep your eyes on number 4. This kid's a monster. Jeremiah Love is one of my favorite players in the country. He can take over this game, point blank period. He can do just about everything you want him to do on the field, and he will be the best football player on the field on Saturday. Army's got to know where he is at all times. If you lose him, you will lose this game. If you miss a tackle on him, you will lose this game, plain and simple. So cannot wait for this one. This is a really special one, and one that I think Army deserves all the respect for. Cannot wait to watch this one unfold. I do think Notre Dame gets it done. I do think it's going to be a fun game. I really do. I think they're going to battle back and forth for that first half. I think the defenses are going to have a pretty good day early on. I just think it's going to be too much. I think the physicality of Notre Dame, especially on the offensive line, is going to be a little bit too much for Army's defense, and Notre Dame ends up pulling away late. But I do think Army puts up a good fight, and I think they keep themselves firmly in the CFP conversation if they were to go on and win the American title, and Boise State were to lose one, obviously. But I do think they would still be in the fight if this were to happen, but I just cannot pick against Notre Dame in this spot. It's just too big of a physicality advantage on their respect. So if they're going to run the ball, if that's the way this game is going to be decided, I'm going to go with the team with the 300-pounders on their offensive line. So I am going to go Notre Dame here. A huge win for Notre Dame, and they move on to the final test before they get into the CFP, going to USC. We'll talk about that one next week, but I think it's a little bit more interesting than people are giving it respect for. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got some Big 12 showdowns that we got to talk about. Colorado at Kansas, BYU at Arizona could just decide what we see in Arlington in a couple of weeks. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that huge game happening in Yankee Stadium on Saturday. Notre Dame at Army, technically at Army. It's going to be a really, really fun game. I did pick Notre Dame, I'll be honest. I picked against my heart there. I would love to see Army get that win, to stay undefeated, to really have a moment in the sun, but I just don't see it unfolding. So I went with Notre Dame there. We'll see what happens in that one. But let's get into the Big 12 breakdowns, because we got two huge games this upcoming weekend that could just outright decide what the Big 12 championship is and who has a shot to possibly go to the CFP from this conference. And we'll start with this one. It is a very, very interesting one that, frankly, we wouldn't be breaking down in normal circumstances, but Kansas has been anything but normal the last little bit. They have beaten two teams that they probably had no business beating in Iowa State and BYU the last couple of weeks, and last week BYU was -3 against Kansas. It's exactly what Colorado is. Now, Colorado is on the road, so it's a little bit of a different scenario, but something to watch there. Definitely something that I think Kansas likes to see, that other team favored by 3 points. That's right where their sweet spot is. But at the end of the day, it is going to be really interesting to watch this game for a number of reasons, but mainly the battle of styles is going to be really interesting. Obviously, Colorado is all pass, and there's no doubt about that. They do 60% pass plays. They do not really have a run game to speak of most of the games. And then for Kansas, the run game leads the way. About 57% of the time they run the ball. Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw, even Jalen Daniels getting in the run game, a huge part of that offense, and likely will test this Colorado team that's been really good against the run the last couple of weeks, but will continue to test that strength for Colorado. And then this Kansas offense has been cooking the last little bit. Before that BYU game, they had scored 27 points in 6 straight games. They had been rolling right along, and although their defense had been up and down throughout that time, obviously it was incredible last week, it was not so incredible against Iowa State and against a couple other teams throughout their season. But at the end of the day, they're probably going to have to put up points in this one. It's probably a game that you're going to get a little bit of a shootout if Kansas is going to get this one done. That being said, if that defense shows up the way that it did last week, maybe they can slow down this Colorado offense just a little bit. On the Colorado side, the pressure is mounting. There's no doubt about that. They've been cool, calm, collected throughout this time. But to me, this is the biggest test since Kansas State, in my opinion. I think this is different in a lot of different ways. Maybe not the best team they played when they went to Texas Tech. That's probably a better team. But I also think with all of the pressure, with all of the stuff going in and Kansas rolling right along, I do think that adds a little bit to this. So I do think this is a big-time test for them, and it's going to be one of those moments. I've said it pretty much all year. It's the biggest game in Deion's Colorado era, no doubt about that. Obviously, next week could be a bigger one, and the week after that, hopefully, will be a bigger one for Colorado fans, but they need to execute at a very high level, especially defensively on Saturday, or they might just have to deal with a little bit of that Kansas magic that's been unfolding the last couple of weeks. But some players to watch. Will Sheppard is someone that I think is still getting a little bit undervalued when we talk about Colorado. I think that offense, we saw it early in the season. It wasn't quite that Colorado offense that we expected to see. And a lot of that had to do with the offensive line coming along and doing their thing, obviously. But I do think a lot of it had to do with Will Sheppard wasn't quite getting the ball quite enough early on in the year, and now he's so dangerous. He is the biggest 50-50 threat, deep ball, just go up and get it type guy on that team. And you add that to LeJontay Wester and Travis Hunter and all the other guys, it's a nightmare to deal with. So he's someone that they're going to have to try to shut down, knock out those big-time plays that he makes. If you can do that, then everything should be in front of you, and then you just have to tackle, which is going to be a rather tall order, but at the end of the day, makes it a little bit easier than dealing with 6'5" up in the air. And then you got Cameron Silman-Craig, a really important player on the back end of that defense. Travis Hunter takes all of the headlines, as he probably should, but this is a very talented player both in run support and in pass defense, and I think run support is where you're going to want him on Saturday, no doubt about that. He's going to be the guy that you're going to want to drop down into the box and play an extra guy in it, because you got a couple of big-time running backs coming at you, and I think Daniel Highshaw is going to be a huge one for Kansas. I think he's a huge player for this game, not necessarily because he's a better player than Devin Neal, but because he's a little bit more of a bruiser. I think if Kansas is going to be able to win this game, it is about wearing down that Colorado team just a little bit with your run game. Also, you are going to have to hit big plays, and you should have a couple of openings to do that. But I do think wearing down this front seven, wearing down this team that hypothetically you should be able to, I think will open up a lot of doors for them. Daniel Highshaw leaning on that team could be a little bit much for them on Saturday. And then you got Dean Miller, a very talented defensive end for Kansas, 5.5 sacks on the year. You got to get after Shedeur. If you're going to be able to win this game, you have to make that offensive line that has really come a long way for Colorado, has been playing good football. You got to make them look like they did last year. If you're going to tear them to pieces, then Colorado's offense is going to have a lot of trouble being able to get this pass game going, especially downfield, the way that really makes that offense special. So it's going to be awesome to watch, and him, along with all the other edge rushers, are going to have their hands full. But some keys to the game. Who wins the time of possession is very interesting to me. I tend to believe it's going to be Kansas, but at the end of the day, both of these offenses are explosive. They're both dangerous, and Kansas has been more explosive over the last couple of weeks. Both defenses are solid, but absolutely can be exposed. So which is the team that can kind of elongate drives? Which is the team that can get down into the 20 and then just run the ball 5 straight times, get into the end zone? You would think it would be more a little bit Kansas, and maybe we'll lean a little bit more that direction. But I do think Colorado has that ability as well. And also, on the other part of that, even if they lose the time of possession, Colorado has the ability to respond very quickly and make life really tough for Kansas. But it'll be interesting to watch that unfold. And then the Buffs' pressure is mounting. There's really nothing to be said more than no one fully understands what this pressure is until you get there. Colorado can prep themselves as well as they possibly can for this game and all the games coming forward. When you walk into that building and you understand that you are the top team in the conference now, well, technically not by the rankings, but I think they should be. They are one of the top teams in the conference now. You have a chance to take a full stranglehold of the conference. That pressure gets a little bit more mounted. Now, they've handled it incredibly well throughout the season. We'll see if they can handle it really well on Saturday. And then you're going to have a really fun quarterback duel. Jalen Daniels started the year very slowly, but he's really come along, been a great the back half of this season. Shedeur Sanders, been one of the best quarterbacks in the country pretty much all year. He's been absolutely incredible, and both are outright required to make a couple of big off-schedule plays throughout this game. The question is, who can make them more and who can make them more consistently? That's probably going to be a huge decider in this game. And frankly, I went back and forth about 10 times on this game. I didn't know which way to go. I'm going to go with the team that I think is just rolling right now. I think Colorado's rolling downhill. I think it's going to be really, really hard to stop this team. I'm going to go with them to win 31-27. I think Kansas has a really real shot in this game. I do think they will fight tooth and nail, and I think it'll be a really fun game, no doubt about it. I just can't pick against Colorado right now. They're rolling right along. They're the best team in the Big 12 as far as I'm concerned, and I think they're going to be a really tough team to deal with for Kansas, especially with that offense. But going to be a really fun game. I'll take Colorado, and they might just punch their ticket to the Big 12 championship. And then we got BYU-Arizona State, a ranked matchup over there in the Big 12 now that those rankings came out yesterday. This one's going to be fun. Whoever wins this one, likely on their way to Arlington. Obviously, they still have one more game to go after this, but definitely going to be really interesting. If whoever wins this one, if they don't get to Arlington, I'll be rather surprised, and it will be because chaos just happened all over the place. But BYU could go from undefeated to out in 2 weeks. Arizona State could continue to rise and be one of the biggest stories in college football over the back half of this season. But BYU has won a lot of games in that 50-50 area. They've won a lot of games where they've won the turnover battle. They didn't quite last week. They won a lot of games where they were great on 3rd and 4th down. They weren't quite last week. Again, in the red zone, they've been absolutely incredible. They weren't quite last week. So the question is, can they get that mojo back? Can they do the things that they've been able to do for the first 9 games, but they weren't quite able to do for the 10th? Has all of that gone away? Or was that just a blip on the radar where they can get back on the right track for this week, win the turnover battle, get back to business as usual in some ways for BYU? For Arizona State, they feel like a boulder rolling downhill right now. They are rolling, and it's one of those things where it's Cam Skattebo, one of the best players in the country, one of the best running backs in the country. All that being said, last week they didn't really have him all that much. He had 25 carries. He only had 74 yards. He wasn't necessarily a huge part of that offense, but Sam Leavitt took over that game. He was absolutely incredible. I believe had over 300 yards passing, a lot of that to Jordan Tyson, but it's going to be another game where he's going to have to be huge and probably make a couple of plays because that BYU front seven is a really good group. And we'll talk about that actually a little bit later in the show. But all that being said, BYU, they are giving up almost 150 on the ground. So it's not necessarily like they're the best run defense in the world. Maybe Cam Skattebo can get going. I do think BYU is going to put a little bit more attention there and trust the back end just a little bit. But I do think it's going to be one of those things where can they slow down this BYU rushing attack? Can they do the thing that is going to be really tough to do, and not a lot of teams have been able to do it? But Kansas State was able to last week, so maybe that's the difference. Maybe teams have figured out how to kind of slow down Cam Scadaboo just a little bit. If BYU can do that, then you're putting another game in the hands of Sam Leavitt, and we'll see if he can respond against a much better pass defense than he played last week. But these two teams are going to be going all out. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be everything for them, huge implications. One of those games that wouldn't be quite as big if BYU won last week, but now might just be a playing game for that game in Arlington, which is going to be just incredible to watch unfold. But Darius Lassiter is someone on the BYU team that I think when we talk about this BYU team, it's all about the different, Jake Retzlaff. It's all about the quarterback. It's all about some of the players defensively. Darius Lassiter has been a huge player for this team down the stretch of the season. He's been a great wide receiver, especially next to Chase Roberts. He's been a great other option, and I think when you have him, you can do a lot of really, really great things. You can open up a number of things for other players on the field. You can do a number of things where he plays different positions and plays around with stuff. He's a very veteran guy. I think he's hugely important, especially just down the stretch of the season, to be kind of that go-to guy, I suppose, for Jake Retzlaff on those big plays. I think you're going to find number 5 a lot on those. And then Jacob Robinson, a cornerback for BYU, he's got 3 picks on the season. And frankly, if you can get a couple of picks in this game, it's going to be hard for Arizona State to come back. They've done a really, really good job of limiting possessions, of not turning the ball over, playing really good defense. If you put them in tough positions on the defensive side of the ball by getting a turnover, this thing could get interesting, and maybe a lot of that Arizona State magic goes away pretty quickly. And then Shimon Metier, I think, is a huge player for this game, the tight end for Arizona State. When you talk, Arizona State's pass game has not necessarily been the big part of their game. Obviously, it was last week with Jordan Tyson having a huge game. You got to make sure that you have more guys to go to. You got to make sure you have a tight end, maybe another wide receiver that you can throw the ball to, because the reality is, if BYU wants to take one guy away, they can do that. If they want to take Jordan Tyson away, they have the ability to do that. They maybe can't take away as many guys, especially a tight end. If you're running the ball effectively, he could be a huge player that you just get on a dump-off pass and he goes 15 yards down the field on a huge third down. So definitely someone to watch where they might just be chasing around Jordan Tyson. Number 7 might get open pretty quickly, and then you have a big play, no doubt about it. And then Xavier Alford, a very important player. He's bounced around a little bit throughout his career, but a very talented back-end player for this team. And I think you look at this BYU team, they're probably going to run the ball pretty consistently. That is kind of what they do. They're a little bit more balanced than Arizona State is, but definitely a little bit of a battle back and forth, no doubt about that. And I do think when you look at BYU, a lot of those big-time pass plays have been the ones that have really opened up games. Whether it's Akila Marion or to Chase Roberts or to Darius Lassiter, they're going to have to make sure that they eliminate those. And also, you get one pick in this game, that crowd might come alive and never go away. So that's the huge-time thing here. If Arizona State can get those big-time pop plays, it might be hard for BYU to really hear themselves think, frankly. And that's my first key to the game, actually. Arizona State's home crowd. This is a moment that they have not had in a very long time around Tempe, Arizona. They have a head coach that I know for a fact is going to be very gassed up for this game. Might just be around campus today, telling people to get to the game on Saturday. But at the end of the day, the crowd is going to be on fire. BYU, they're just going to have to keep their composure. In a week where you absolutely need a win, you now have to deal with a road atmosphere to get it. If they were able to win last week, they could drop this game, but they can't do it anymore. It's going to be a really tough one. And then run game consistency is a huge part of this game. I think both teams have great running backs, LJ Martin for BYU, Cam Scadaboo for Arizona State. Both these teams are going to have to get production on the ground if they want to open up some of the things downfield that could really change this game. So who can get this thing going? Which offensive line can win the battle is going to be hugely important, and who can just get that consistent run game? Not necessarily 15 yards and then 3 1-yard rushes, but 4 yards, 5 yards, and then 8 yards. That's going to be a huge part of this, and definitely will wear down one of these defenses one way or the other. And then handling the moment. That is a big part of really every team around the country right about now that's still in the hunt. You got to handle pressure that has not been there for a lot of these teams. Arizona State and BYU definitely included in that group. The implications are as high as they have ever felt. Jake Retzlaff, Sam Leavitt, and pretty much every other player on the team is going to have to handle that one way or the other. So it's going to be a really, really fun game. Cannot wait to see that one unfold. But I'm going to go with Arizona State. They feel like they're rolling downhill right now. They feel like they're going to be really hard for them to stop Cam Scadaboo. And the way that Sam Leavitt's playing right now, I'm not going to bet against him. He's playing such good football and definitely a guy that I think can win this game for Arizona State. So I'm going to pick the Sun Devils. I'm going to pick them in Colorado to be in the catbird seat as we head into the last week of the season for the Big 12. But a lot of stuff can unfold, no doubt about that, and some craziness can unfold in these two games. If Kansas wins, stuff happens. A lot of stuff happens in the Big 12, and we will break it all down as it does, if that does unfold. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about some upset alerts. I got 6 for you. 4 of them are SEC teams, so it gives you an idea of how crazy this weekend could be in the SEC, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down those 2 big games in the Big 12. I do have Arizona State, I do have Colorado winning. Probably the 2 teams that I expect to see in Arlington. Obviously, some chaos can happen, and it's the Big 12, so we will be watching for it. But at the end of the day, I do have Colorado winning. I do have Arizona State winning, the 2 favorites this upcoming weekend, and we'll see what happens from there. But let's get to upset alerts. All around the country, we have a number of games, and in the SEC, they're taking up a lot of the wealth. And we'll start with that game that's going on in Norman, Oklahoma. Had to go back to one of their playoff games to get one of these pictures. But at the end of the day, going to be a really, really fun game in Norman, and I think this is one of those games that we're not touching on quite enough, and it feels like the Alabama fan base, at least from what I've seen, I think there are some people trying to bring people back to reality, but it does feel like they're looking a little bit ahead to that Auburn game. It feels like they're really wanting to dominate that Iron Bowl and move forward. Kind of feels like what Ohio State could be dealing with this week, where obviously the big game is Indiana, no doubt about that. They want to beat the crap out of Michigan at the end of the year. Maybe a little bit of attention is going that direction. Obviously, Alabama's got to take care of business here if they want to stay in the fight, so obviously plenty of focus within the team is probably on this game, but I do think the fan base might be getting a little bit ahead of themselves. Oklahoma's coming off a bye. They're at home. They play great defense. And a win, they need one win to get them bowl eligible. It's all of the momentum, all of the energy, all the motivation is still with Oklahoma in a lot of different ways. Now, Alabama's got plenty of motivation as well, but I do think Oklahoma still has plenty to play for this year. And I think with Brent Venables, that's not going to be a team you're going to see quit very often. But the Oklahoma defense is one of the best in the country when it comes to forcing turnovers and stopping the run. If they can do those 2 things, they have a chance to get a win here. There's no doubt about that. If they can slow down what Jalen Milroe and that rushing attack does, especially the last couple of weeks, what it's done, and if they can stop the deep pass over the middle of the field, maybe get a couple of picks, now that has been an issue for them. Those deep passes over 20 yards has been an issue for this Oklahoma defense. We know Jalen Milroe can make those throws, but at the end of the day, if you stop the run and you live with whatever happens when that ball is going 50 yards downfield, probably the way that you want to go about business if you're Oklahoma. And then you might be able to get a couple of mistakes from Jalen Milroe, a couple of turnovers, and then you might be off running. So Alabama's in a spot to me where they absolutely know what they need to do. They know they have to get in. They know they don't have any wiggle room to get in. So the question is, how focused will they be? I tend to believe very focused. I don't think there's any looking ahead. I don't think there's any, thinking about Auburn or any of that might be going on in the fan base. I don't think that's going on too much in the locker room. I think Kalen DeBoer is very good at getting his guys ready in that respect. And also, the defense travels, and the defense has played really, really well lately. So the way I look at this game is if Bama's going to lose, they got to score under 20 points. And this Bama offense, I don't see scoring under 20 points right about now. So I do think they get this win. I'm going to put it a 1 out of 5 on the upset meter. I don't expect this to happen by any means, but that Oklahoma defense gives them a shot in just about every game they play. Then SMU, they're in a little bit of a fight here, no doubt about that. They're in a little bit of a fight against Virginia, and a Virginia team that is coming off a game where they struggled against Notre Dame, no doubt about that. But right before that, they were able to beat Pitt and kind of ruin their season a little bit more. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. SMU has a very interesting dynamic. Really, both these teams have a very interesting dynamic when it comes to the urgency. Technically, SMU can lose this game. If they were to beat Cal next week and lose this game, they would still be going to Charlotte, still have a shot to get into the CFP. For Virginia, they really want to get to that bowl game before they get into that rivalry game against Virginia Tech at Virginia Tech next week. So they have a little bit of motivation. I'm not saying that Virginia has more motivation than SMU. I don't necessarily believe that. But it is interesting that SMU technically can lose this game. Virginia very badly wants to win it, because if they go on the road to Blacksburg needing a win to get to a bowl game, they might just not get to a bowl game, if I'm being totally honest. But the issue for SMU here is, or the issue that SMU is going to pose to Virginia, is the pass game. Virginia has not been one of the best pass defenses in the country, 270 yards given up per game. So it's going to be a battle. If they can't keep this SMU passing attack in front of them, especially guys like Jordan Hudson and Roderick Daniels, it's going to be a lot to deal with. So it's a tougher one for SMU, no doubt about that. You're on the road to a team that is desperate to get that 6th win. The pressure continues to grow. I do think SMU should be okay here. We'll break it down in a little bit more detail tomorrow likely, but I do think they should be okay here. Probably a 2 out of 5 on the upset meter. Definitely one to watch out for, but I wouldn't necessarily be too worried if I was an SMU fan. Penn State, they go on the road to Minnesota this upcoming weekend. They have 2 games from hosting a CFP game. I don't think they should be 2 games from hosting a CFP game, but that's beside the point. This Minnesota team is very tough. They've won 4 out of their last 5 now. They did lose last week to Rutgers, so that was the 5th. But at the end of the day, they have been playing really good football. Max Brosmer has become a really long way from the beginning of the season, where it looked like that offense was a little bit, if you're going to run the ball, that's all you're going to do pretty much. But they've been able to find that pass game throughout the week. And for Penn State, they're elite defense. There's no doubt about that. They're one of the best in the country against the run and the pass. So can Max Brosmer find the plays through the air that he has found in the past couple of weeks, or will it kind of fall on deaf ears? Will they not be able to find those big plays? And then in the run game, will they be able to find openings for Darius Taylor to get downfield to make those big plays that he absolutely has the ability to make? But definitely is going to be a fight one way or the other. So it's going to be awesome to watch going on the road against a team that is looking for that big time marquee win. Especially ruining Penn State season would be a nice feather in the cap of Minnesota, no doubt about that. But I do think this one is going to be really, really tough. I think Minnesota knows that. Just unload on this one. Just put all the energy, all kind of a Florida LSU type vibe in this one. Put all of the eggs in this basket. Put everything into this game. You get it at 3:30. If they can win it, this entire thing would get a little bit crazy. Some SEC teams would be very happy, but it would be very interesting to watch. Overall, Penn State should be able to run the ball in this game. The Minnesota defense isn't necessarily great at stopping the run, and they should be able to win if they play mistake-free. So if Drew Aller doesn't give the ball away, if they don't have fumbles, penalties, that type of thing drops, they should be okay. So I think they'll get away with the win, but definitely one worth watching. I'll put a 2 out of 5 on it, but definitely some that I'm a little bit more interested in than maybe some others out there. Then we got Texas hosting Kentucky, and they are the only one on this list, actually, that is at home for this game. But Kentucky goes to Austin in the mission just to ruin the Lone Star Showdown next week. And we'll actually talk about the other team in that here in a second. But they proved in Oxford that they absolutely can do that. They can ruin the fun, especially for offenses that are very explosive. They can slow you down. There's no doubt about that. I believe, I can't remember the exact score of that game. I want to say Ole Miss only scored about 10 points, 13 maybe. I can't exactly remember. But at the end of the day, it was an absolutely incredible game from that Kentucky defense. If they can do that on Saturday, then this Texas offense has shown it can get bogged down. It can get a little bit lost. It can get a little bit stagnant. Now, I do think they're good enough to score 20 points or so on this team, but I do think there is a world where they get really bogged down and it looks really ugly. But here's the thing. Texas does know the deal. They understand that if you lose one of the next 2 games, you will not be in. Now, maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room there. That might sound crazy, but I don't think there should be wiggle room, but it sounds like there might be. It's going to be really interesting to watch. I think they do need this win one way or the other if they're going to get into the field, and I think they probably got to look pretty good doing it just to give them maybe a little bit of that wiggle room in the A&M game. But Kentucky is the last is a team that has only won or has lost 4 straight SEC games after that Ole Miss game. So they're in a really tough spot. They're still trying to get back into the bowl eligibility and will need win here. They already got a win last week, so they'll need probably 3 wins to finish this thing off, with Texas and Louisville coming up the next couple of weeks. But they gave Tennessee a good scare in that run, so they're still a very capable team, still a very tough offense, but Texas absolutely rolls at home. They've won 5 games there this year. They've scored at least 35 times every time in DKR. I think Tennessee is best equipped to slow them down, no doubt about that. I think it could get really interesting. I put a 3 out of 5 on this one. Definitely a little bit nervous for Texas' ability to win this one, but them at home, that offense, I think will get rolling a little bit better than it was last week. I think Texas does win, but I think it's going to be a fun one. Then we got Ole Miss. They make their appearance into the top 10 this week, and they got a big one on the road at Gainesville, and it's going to be a very, very tough game. There is some talk about Ole Miss possibly being that 5th SEC team, but it does seem like it's Tennessee. Given those rankings that came out yesterday, it does seem like it's Tennessee, and I do think it's going to be interesting to watch what Ole Miss does the rest of the way. It looks like they just have to win out, and they're in really good shape. Thing is, Florida is coming off a game that really gave them a lot of confidence. They beat LSU at home, and a lot of the juice in that team is with that guy right there and DJ Lagway, a very important player and one of those guys that can just outright win games. He can do it any which way you want him to. It was not necessarily a perfect game against LSU by any means. He was able to make the big plays down the stretch, and that was a huge part of that game. And also, you're going to the Swamp for this one, which is not ideal by any means. Now, you do get it at noon, which is very, very nice. Not getting it at night like LSU did is a blessing. But at the end of the day, getting it at any time is going to be loud. It's going to be aggressive, and you just got a fan base that got their taste. They got the juice that they needed, and they're going to be on fire for this one. So they want to ruin another promising season. They want to knock someone else in the SEC out of the race, and I think they have the ability to. This one's going to be really interesting. I'll do a full breakdown tomorrow, so I won't tip my hand too much in this pick, but I do think this is going to be really, really interesting. Ole Miss, if you win, you only got Mississippi State standing between you and a CFP. You lose, those fans get mad in a hurry, and you miss a huge opportunity in 2024. But going to be really interesting. I'll put a 4 out of 5 on that one, and we'll break it down in more detail tomorrow. Along with this one, we'll actually break this one down tomorrow as well, because you look at that line. Texas A&M's only favored by 2.5 on the road at Auburn. This one's really tough. There's no doubt about that. Texas is in a tough spot against Kentucky. A&M's in a much tougher spot as they get close to that Lone Star Showdown. So it's going to be interesting to watch this one unfold. I think the other part is what Texas is probably dealing with this upcoming week, the look-ahead factor. And if you saw the press conference from Mike Elko, they might be looking ahead just a little bit. But I do think it was just a slip-up. It was a very funny slip-up, no doubt about that. But are they looking ahead just a little bit here? And you're going into Jordan-Hare at night. You do not want to be looking ahead. If you do look ahead, you're going to come away with the loss, and you're going to be out of the CFP before you even go to that game. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. The A&M offense, particularly the quarterback, is still a big-time question for me. And it's a big-time question in this game in particular because Auburn is very long. They're very athletic, especially on the front seven. Could they slow down that A&M rushing attack, especially the quarterback rushing attack, and make life a little bit tough for them the same way South Carolina did? And then this is kind of a perfect storm in a lot of different ways. This is a 5 out of 5 to me, first of all, but this is kind of a perfect storm where you don't necessarily have a great matchup for A&M on the field. You're away from home at Jordan-Hare at night, the biggest game before the biggest game in a decade for your program. It's going to be a battle all the way through. I feel very confident in that. I will break down that game tomorrow, but that's definitely one you're going to want to be watching for in the SEC this week. But a ton of big-time games, definitely some more on the slate that I'm sure you can find, no doubt about that. But went with those for that Upset Alert segment, and we'll take our last break here. And when we come back, we got to get into all the questions we have as we head into this week. Definitely a lot of them, including will the picture get clearer this week with the Big 12 and the Big 10, or will it get a little bit more murky if Colorado were to lose? But we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the upset alerts as I see it. A lot of SEC teams that are going to be in a little bit of trouble. A couple going on the road. Texas inviting Kentucky in. couple of tough games that could totally change the makeup of the playoff and the makeup of the SEC down the stretch of this season. But let's get into the Week 13 questions. There is a lot that I have on my plate, and I think the biggest one is, will this week give us the answers that we're looking for, or will it confuse us a little bit more? And I think this game is the best example of that. We should get answers from a number of different games this upcoming weekend. We are not guaranteed to get answers from just about any of them. So we'll start with that Ohio State-Indiana game. Let's say we get to 3:30 on Saturday, and Indiana has lost by, let's say, 17. Does anyone know how the playoff committee is going to handle that? I tend to believe they would still put Indiana in. I can't say that with confidence. And then on the flip side of that, if Ohio State loses by 3, does anyone really understand how they're going to handle Ohio State going forward? I still think they would be in, but definitely something to watch, and one that could get a little bit interesting, and definitely we might just have to wait till Tuesday to get the full answer on that. So definitely something to watch there. And then we should be able to get answers in the Big 12. If I had to imagine, we should get answers. This is the game where we just outright will get an answer. One way or the other, we will know which one of these teams is in the driver's seat to get to Arlington, which one of these teams is probably out of the race, especially if Arizona State loses. BYU technically still has a path if they lose, but I'd be very surprised. So that should give us an idea of where everything sits. Now, the flip side of that is, what happens if Colorado loses to Kansas? And then you have to figure out what happens there, and then Iowa State's back into the mix, and maybe Kansas State gets back into the mix. So a lot of different things that are still on the table for this upcoming weekend in the Big 12. So we should get answers. We should get at least one answer of, is Arizona State in it? Is BYU still in it? Which one of those teams is still in the race for the to go to Arlington? Beyond that, we could have a lot of more confusion around it than we want, and it could get really interesting, especially with that Colorado game. If they lose, this thing gets interesting in a hurry, and the Big 12 might get a little bit nervous about their position in the CFP. But we'll obviously break that down in time. We'll see what happens there. The other question is, who needs to make a statement? There's so many teams around the country that are looking at this week and saying, this is a big-time opening for us. And I'll start with Colorado. I understand that Kansas game isn't necessarily the biggest game in the world. Even in their own conference, it's not the biggest game in the world. But Colorado has a chance to this week. If they win and Arizona State wins, they'll be sitting on the top of that conference they just joined alone. And it will be Deion Sanders in his second year at Colorado, alone at the top of a conference that everyone said, including myself, said that they had no chance to win. That would be incredible. Now, they do have to beat Kansas, which has been a very, very tough thing, but it'd be a huge moment in program history and absolutely would show that whatever Deion did, whether or not you agreed with it or not, it's working. So it's really, really impressive, and I think this week could be just kind of a stamp on all the stuff they've done throughout the year. Boise State's another one. They're only playing Wyoming this week, so it's not necessarily a huge game by any chance, but they have been slipping the last couple of weeks, at least in my eyes, maybe not so much in the rankings eyes, but at the end of the day, I do think getting a dominating win could get them right back on track. I think getting a huge win by, let's say, 30 points, they just dominate Wyoming from start to finish, I think they could bump them back up, give them a little bit more confidence as they head to the back half of their schedule, or the back end of their schedule, because I do think that Mountain West Championship, either against Colorado State or UNLV, could be a lot tougher than they're giving it credit for right now. So I think they got to get back on the right track. I think this week would be a huge chance to do that. And then obviously, it's Indiana. This is the moment. There's no two ways about that. This is the moment where you make that statement, where you show that you can go toe-to-toe with an Ohio State on their field, and you can get into the CFP and still compete. So it's going to be a huge moment. It could go a number of different directions. If they were to win or play it really close, I think all the momentum is going there into 2025 and really into the playoff this year. But then you have the flip side of that, where maybe they get blown out, and then you have a lot of questions around this team going forward, and maybe questions around this program going forward. But a huge moment nonetheless, and a statement would be program changing if they were able to do that. And then the under-the-radar game of the week. There's a lot of really fun games that don't necessarily have that CFP implications that a lot of people love to see, but really, really fun games nonetheless. We'll start with Wisconsin-Nebraska. This is going to be a battle. Both these teams sit at 5-5. Wisconsin just got rid of Phil Longo as their offensive coordinator. Nebraska's still breaking in Dana Holgorsen. It's going to be really interesting to see how these two teams attack each other and how the defenses kind of handle all the differences that are likely coming from this game offensively. And then Pitt-Louisville, this is kind of the who's still fighting bowl in the ACC, because both these teams were knocked out of the question, or out of contention for the ACC this past weekend. who's ready to get back up and who's ready to get rolling down the stretch of this year, because there's a couple of big-time games down the stretch and a lot of momentum that can be built as you go into 2025 for both these programs. A loss on Saturday would put you in a very weird place, no doubt about that. USC-UCLA is my answer. You got a rivalry game. You got two teams kind of heading in different directions in the back half of this season. UCLA kind of starting to ascend. USC starting to dip down. UCLA still trying to get to a bowl game. If they win this one, they'll only have Fresno State left, and they can get that win. They can go to 6-6 in the first year of Deshaun Foster. That'd be a huge win, no doubt about that. USC trying to build off what they got against Nebraska last week, although it was a little bit sketchy at the end. They were able to get the win, and they were able to move forward, and you just want to get momentum as you head into 2025 at this point. They already got some momentum on the recruiting trail. If they can keep it going on the field, they'll feel really good about 2025. Then we got to get to the group of five, a little bit more under the radar as well, but the group of five games of the week. Ohio-Toledo is going to be really fun in the MAC, and it's going on tonight, so definitely tune in for that one. But Ohio sitting atop the conference in the nightmare that is 5-1 in the MAC. Toledo's 4-2 and still trying to make that late run. A really good team. Tucker Gleason, a very talented quarterback for them. There's kind of differing styles in a lot of ways. Toledo is going to throw the ball around a lot. They don't necessarily have that running quarterback that Ohio has in Parker Navarro. So it's going to be a very fun battle back and forth, kind of a battle of styles, and maybe it just comes down to who can hit more plays. Toledo, can you hit more plays through the air, or Ohio more plays on the ground? It'll be really, really fun to watch there. UNLV San Jose State is a huge one. This is one that could just decide the Mountain West Championship, because UNLV is still trying the hardest to get into there, and we'll talk about a game that could help them out right after this. But San Jose State showed last week that they are a very tough matchup for just about anyone, and they could be a good matchup defensively for UNLV. This will be a really fun game. We will break it down tomorrow a little bit more detail, but this one's going to be really fun, and I think going to be a battle to the end. And then Colorado State, Fresno State. That is going to be a huge game for that game we just talked about. If UNLV were to win and Colorado State were to lose, that's the one that UNLV would find their way back into that championship game, possibly get a rematch with Boise State, and they'd very much want to ruin that season. But Colorado State's rolling right along right now. They are undefeated in that conference. They are right up there with Boise State, and they are not favored in this game. So we'll talk about this one a little bit later in the week as well, but that's an absolutely huge one, and one that could just decide who goes to that Mountain West Championship and who's sitting at home. Then we got to talk about the Heisman race. As we get into the back half of the season, it's thinned out. We know pretty much who's going to really have a shot to win it. It's pretty much those two guys at the top as far as I'm concerned, but there's still some guys that have plenty to play for, and we'll talk about Cam Ward. Cam Ward has kind of been left behind in the Heisman conversation lately, at least from my point of view. He lost that game to Georgia Tech, even though he was not the reason that they lost. He did lose that game to Georgia Tech, and then went on a bye, and a lot of people's attention went different places, including mine to a certain respect. I'm not necessarily saying I'm immune to this, but definitely was something that I noticed throughout the last couple of weeks. He could come in, just totally tear Wake to pieces and get right back in that conversation and maybe just punch his ticket to NYC, honestly. Travis Hunter, no doubt about that. He has a chance to seal it this week, at least in my mind. If he were to go out there and have a Utah-type performance against Kansas, maybe even a little bit better than that, at least I would like to see a little bit better than that, but at the end of the day, if he does that, it's going to be really hard for anyone else to catch up, anyone else to even come close, if I'm being totally honest. So, it's going to be a battle one way or the other, and Travis Hunter is one of those guys that I think he can close the book on this race on Saturday. Then we'll talk about Curtis Rourke. He is very unlikely to win the award. I feel pretty confident in that. I don't think he's out of the realm of possibility for him to get an invite to NYC. I think he has an opening here where if he were to go out, win a game in Columbus, in the Horseshoe, and play really well doing it, I think he might just get that invite. I think he's on the outside looking in right now. I think that could change in a hurry on Saturday. And then we got to talk about individual matchups, and we'll stay in that game, actually. The Indiana wide receivers against this Ohio State backend is going to be really fun to watch. Elijah Surratt, Miles Price, Omar Cooper Jr., some really talented guys, and Ohio State really struggled against the Oregon group. This isn't quite as talented as that Oregon group, of course, but definitely still a really good group, and Elijah Surratt, terrifying. Anyone who's guarding him should be a little bit terrified because this dude can go up and get balls really wherever, and he's one of those guys that I think because of that jersey, we're not appreciating just how good of a player he is. He is one of the best wide receivers in the country, and he's going to be a load to deal with for whoever that it gets him, and it's probably going to be Denzel Burke. The Army O-line against the Notre Dame D-line is going to be huge. Probably the matchup that will outright decide it. If Notre Dame wins it, Army's not going to win this game, just plain and simple. If Army's able to get a little bit of push and get this run game going, then Notre Dame could be in a ton of trouble on Saturday. So it's one of those games that it's going to come down to that run game. It's really going to come down to that Army run game. Cam Scadaboo against the BYU front seven is fascinating. The BYU front seven is very dynamic. They're very long. They're very athletic. They're not necessarily all that great at stopping the run, so they do need to be a lot better against a relatively good offensive line for Arizona State. They're going to have to battle back and forth, and really, more than anything else, I think it's kind of a war of attrition. I think it comes down to who in the fourth quarter with about 5 minutes left is still fighting every single down. Is Cam Scadaboo still fighting through tackles? Is BYU still rallying to the ball and getting all those big-time tackles that they're going to need? It's going to be really fun to watch, no doubt about that, and I do think Cam Scadaboo is one of those guys that is more than happy to lean on you with 35 carries in a game. But it's going to be an incredible week. I cannot wait for this weekend. Obviously, the SEC continues to do that FCS thing that they do around this time of year that makes me mad. But at the end of the day, still some really incredible games. And we will break down the big-time one, Indiana at Ohio State. We'll break that one down tomorrow. I feel pretty good about my pick right now, but definitely some wiggle room that I'm trying to figure out where exactly I want to land on. We will get to that tomorrow, so definitely tune in for that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We got great people doing great work across every sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow to break down that huge one going on in Columbus this weekend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.